What if the knock you hear in the middle of the night isn't your neighbor and isn't the wind, but something that knows you're awake? What if the reflection staring back at you in the mirror doesn't belong to you and never did? What if the hotel room you paid for with your own money isn't empty because someone has been living there silently, waiting in the dark? And what if the figure you pass on the street at night isn't passing by at all, but following every step you take until there's nowhere left to go? These are the kinds of questions most of us dismiss the moment they appear in our minds. They're uncomfortable. They're irrational. We convince ourselves they're nothing but tricks of the imagination. Yet, every so often, someone encounters something that tears away that fragile comfort, leaving them shaken, disturbed, and forever aware that the world is not as safe or as ordinary as we like to believe. Think carefully about the last time you felt uneasy for no clear reason. Maybe it was walking down a hallway in your own home and feeling, just for a second, that someone else was there with you. Maybe it was a sudden chill in a room where the air shouldn't have changed. Or maybe it was the sound of your name whispered so faintly you almost convinced yourself you imagined it. Almost. These moments come and go. They pass quickly. They leave no evidence behind. But what if, just once, you paid attention? What if you stopped dismissing them as coincidences? What would you discover if you didn't turn away so quickly? The 4 encounters you're about to hear are the result of people who couldn't turn away. People who experienced something that refused to let them ignore it. Each story begins with a moment so ordinary, you or I might have overlooked it. A walk home, a night in a hotel, a mirror in the bathroom, a knock at the door. Simple things, everyday things. But that's what makes them so disturbing. Because when something feels wrong in a place you thought was safe, it doesn't leave you. It follows you home, it lingers in your memory, and it reminds you over and over that safety is just an idea. Tonight, you'll hear accounts that stay with people long after the moment has passed. One of them will change the way you think about walking alone at night. Another will make you question the comfort of places where you should feel secure. One of them may even change how you look at your own reflection. And by the end, you might realize the most unsettling encounters are not rare, they're everywhere. And you've probably already had one yourself. 4 stories, 4 encounters that cannot be brushed aside. Which one will leave you the most unsettled? That's for you to decide, if you make it through to the last one. It was a quiet suburban night, the kind that feels predictable, safe. Rows of houses with trimmed lawns, streetlights glowing dull amber, the occasional bark of a distant dog. Inside one of those houses, a teenager sat alone. Her parents had gone out for the evening, leaving her with the usual instructions. Lock the doors, don't open for anyone, call if you need us. She was used to being alone, but this night would be different. This night would stay with her forever. The girl sat in the living room, scrolling through her phone. The TV hummed quietly in the background, playing a show she wasn't really watching. Nothing unusual, no reason to be afraid. And yet, she would later say she remembered a feeling, faint at first, of being observed. Like the way you catch someone's eyes on you in a crowded room. Except she was alone. Or she thought she was. It began with a sound, a faint tapping, gentle, like a fingernail brushing glass. She glanced at the window, nothing, just her own reflection staring back. She brushed it off, maybe a tree branch swaying, maybe nothing at all. But the tapping came again, louder, sharper, deliberate. Her body tensed, though her mind tried to explain it away. The wind, a bird, anything ordinary. Still, she turned off the TV, listening now. Silence. She stood, walked slowly to the window, and pulled the curtain back just a little. The street outside looked empty. No one walking, no cars passing, everything still. Too still. She let the curtain fall back into place. sat down again, tried to laugh it off, but as her eyes returned to her phone, something caught her attention. Movement, a shadow, on the wall opposite the window, a shape passing by. Except when she turned her head, there was nothing outside to cast it. She froze, gripping her phone. And that's when it happened. The screen went black. Dead battery. She swore it had been nearly full minutes earlier. She pressed the buttons frantically, but it wouldn't turn back on. She was alone, in silence, with nothing but the faint hum of the house, and the sound of tapping, now steady, rhythmic, insistent. She turned toward the window once more. At first, the glass looked empty, but as her eyes adjusted, she realized a shape was there. A man, standing close enough for his breath to fog the glass. She stumbled back, heart racing. Her mind raced with options: run upstairs, grab something to defend herself, scream for help. But she couldn't move. She couldn't look away. Because when she looked again, he was closer. His face, pale and expressionless, now only inches away from the glass. She backed into the corner, whispering to herself that it wasn't real, that it had to be her imagination. But then the sound changed. The tapping wasn't coming from outside anymore. It was coming from behind her. With trembling hands, she forced herself to pull the curtains wide open, needing to know, desperate to see. The man wasn't outside at all. He was inside. Standing on the other side of the glass, smiling. She screamed until her throat burned, stumbling toward the front door. But by the time neighbors and eventually police arrived, the man was gone. The house was locked. Every window sealed from the inside. No signs of forced entry. No fingerprints. Nothing. To this day, no one has explained how he could have been there. The girl never stayed alone in that house again. And every time she passes a window at night, she feels the same unease. She checks the glass. She avoids her reflection. And sometimes, she swears she still sees him there. So ask yourself, if you had been in her place, would you have opened the curtains or stayed in the dark? He had been driving for hours, the kind of drive where every mile feels longer than the one before it. He wasn't looking for comfort or luxury or even safety. All he wanted was a bed, a place to close his eyes, if only for a few hours, before getting back on the road. That's how he ended up at a roadside motel. One of those places you pass without ever noticing, the neon sign flickering, the paint peeling from the doors, the kind of place where the parking lot feels emptier than it should. He almost kept driving. Almost. But exhaustion won. He pulled in, paid cash at the front desk, and was given a key to room 6. The traveler would later recall how the room smelled faintly of mildew, how the carpet was damp under his shoes. But none of that mattered to him in the moment. He dropped his bag, set his keys on the table, and sat down on the bed. All he wanted was sleep. He didn't know yet that this room would be his last stop. From the beginning, the room felt wrong. The silence wasn't restful. It was heavy, pressing down. No distant traffic, no muffled sounds of other guests, just stillness, as if the world outside had been cut off the moment the door closed behind him. He tried to ignore it. He turned on the lamp beside the bed, but the light flickered, buzzing faintly, making shadows ripple across the walls. His eyes drifted to the mirror above the dresser, and that's when he noticed something. At first, it was subtle, almost too subtle to be sure. When he moved his arm, his reflection followed, but not immediately. A delay. Barely a second, but enough for his stomach to turn cold. He stood, waved his hand slowly, watching the glass. The reflection copied him, but the timing was off. It wasn't a trick of the light. It wasn't his imagination. Something was wrong with the mirror. He forced himself to look away, to laugh at the thought. But then, another sound. Soft, scratching, coming from the closet. Slow, deliberate. like nails dragging across wood. He froze, eyes locked on the thin, rattling door of the closet. The sound stopped. Silence. He leaned forward, straining to listen. That's when he realized, though the scratching had ended, he could still hear something. Breathing. Shallow. Inside the closet. Waiting. He reached for the knob, hand trembling. But before he could touch it, the breathing stopped. Relieved for a moment, he turned back toward the bed, and that's when he saw it. The mirror. His reflection was standing still, staring back at him. He lifted his hand slowly, testing it. This time, the reflection didn't follow at all. It just stared. He whispered to himself, trying to make sense of what he was seeing, but the reflection tilted its head, as if listening, not mirroring, watching. He stepped closer to the mirror, unable to look away. He leaned in, studying his own face, searching for an explanation. His reflection stared back, unmoving. And then it smiled, a wide, unnatural grin spreading slowly across the glass. The traveler stumbled back in shock, but the reflection didn't stay in the mirror. It stepped forward, out of the glass, into the room. The next morning, police were called. Room 6 was empty, no signs of struggle. The bed was untouched, the lamp still flickering. But the traveler's car remained in the parking lot, keys still on the nightstand. His belongings were never claimed. He was gone, as if he had simply walked into the mirror and never returned. So what would you have done? Would you have stared into the glass? Or walked out of the room the moment it felt wrong? Tell me in the comments, because I think you already know which choice he made. It was supposed to be an ordinary evening. A young woman returned from work, kicked off her shoes, and settled into her routine. Dinner, a shower, a quiet night in before bed. Nothing unusual. Nothing that would suggest anything was about to go wrong. She brushed her teeth in the bathroom, humming softly, eyes flicking occasionally to the mirror. She'd looked into that mirror thousands of times before. It was part of her daily life, familiar, harmless, but that night, it didn't feel harmless. It felt wrong. She couldn't explain it. At first, it was just a passing thought, that her reflection's eyes seemed to linger a fraction of a second longer than her own. That when she looked down to rinse her mouth, she thought, for the briefest moment, her reflection didn't look down with her. She blinked, shook it off, laughed to herself. She was just tired. That had to be it. But the unease only grew. She tried testing it, raising her left hand slowly, watching the mirror. The reflection followed, but she swore the motion was half a beat too late. She leaned closer, staring directly into her own eyes, trying to catch the difference. And that's when she saw it. The faintest trace of a smile tugging at the reflection's lips. A smile she knew she hadn't made. Her chest tightened. She stepped back from the sink, gripping the counter. She told herself it was exhaustion, stress, a trick of the light. She had every reason to leave the room, close the door, forget it ever happened. But something inside her wouldn't let her. Something made her look back, and this time her reflection didn't move at all. It stood still, perfectly still, while she slowly raised her trembling hand, while she stepped back inch by inch, its eyes locked onto hers, unblinking, unmoving, watching. She whispered to herself, testing, pleading, "Move!" But it didn't. The reflection just stared back at her, expression fixed, lips curling into that same faint, unnatural grin. She wanted to run, but she couldn't. And then she heard something. A sound, faint at first, but growing clearer. Breathing, not hers, heavy, steady, coming from inside the mirror. She stumbled back, eyes wide, and that's when it happened. The reflection blinked, slowly, deliberately, on its own. And then it leaned closer, pressing its face against the glass, grinning wider, as though trying to break through. She turned, desperate to leave the room. But before she could reach the door, the sound of cracking glass stopped her cold. The mirror's surface rippled, warping, like water. She turned back, frozen. The reflection was no longer standing where she had been. It was on the other side of the glass, leaning forward, its hands pressed against the surface. And then, it moved. Slowly, impossibly, the reflection stepped through, its body sliding out of the mirror as though the glass was only a doorway. She screamed, stumbling backward into the hall. But what her neighbors later reported hearing wasn't a scream that faded. It was a scream that stopped, cut short, as if someone had covered her mouth mid-breath. The next morning, the bathroom was empty. The mirror stood perfectly intact. No cracks, no damage, no sign of struggle. Her phone remained on the counter. Her car still sat in the driveway, but she was gone. To this day, her family avoids that bathroom mirror. They claim it feels colder than the rest of the house, and sometimes, late at night, they say they see movement in the glass. A faint shadow, a figure watching from the other side. So let me ask you, if you had seen your reflection smile on its own, would you have kept watching, or would you have turned away? It was just after midnight when he heard it. A knock at the door. The man lived alone, in a small house on the edge of town. The street was quiet, the neighbors asleep, and visitors at this hour were unheard of. At first, he thought he imagined it, a dream bleeding into reality. But then it came again. 3 knocks, slow, deliberate. He glanced at the clock. 12:03. Too late for deliveries, too late for friends. He hesitated, waiting, listening. The house was silent. Then 3 more knocks, harder this time, patient, waiting. He rose from his chair, heart already uneasy, and walked to the door. The porch light cast a weak glow across the front steps. Through the peephole, nothing. Empty porch, empty street, no movement at all. He exhaled, shaken but relieved, telling himself it was kids playing a prank. He returned to his chair. The silence stretched on. Minutes passed, and just as he began to relax, another knock, this time closer, louder. The sound reverberated through the walls as though whoever or whatever was outside had pressed its face against the wood. He froze, listening. Then came a sound he could never explain, a voice, low, muffled, but clear enough to hear. A voice whispering his name. He bolted upright, adrenaline surging. No one should have known his name. No one should have been outside. He grabbed his phone, hands trembling, and dialed for help. But before the call connected, silence. The phone went dead in his hands. No signal, no power. And then came the knock again. But this time it wasn't on the front door. It was on the window, directly behind him. He spun around, heart pounding. The curtains swayed gently as though touched by unseen hands. He stepped closer, forcing himself to look. And as he pulled the fabric aside, there it was, a face, inches away, staring back at him through the glass. He stumbled backward, crashing into the table, eyes locked on the figure. Pale skin, hollow eyes. Its lips moved, shaping his name again and again, though no sound escaped. And then, the knocking began from every wall of the house, all at once, surrounding him, closing in. By morning, the house was silent again. Neighbors reported hearing nothing unusual during the night. The man's car remained in the driveway, lights still on inside the house, but he was gone. No forced entry, no broken glass. Only one detail stood out. Every door, every window, every surface of the house covered in faint handprints on the inside. So, let me ask you, what would you have done? Answer the door? Hide inside? Or never look at all? Because sometimes, it isn't the knocking you should be afraid of. It's what's already inside, waiting for you to listen. 4 encounters. 4 moments when the ordinary broke apart, and something deeply unsettling took its place. A man who should have stayed outside, but was already inside. A voice calling from a payphone that doesn't exist. Footsteps in the attic where no one should walk, and the knock at the door. That followed him from every wall. Maybe you've convinced yourself they're just stories. Shadows of imagination. Warnings in the dark. But remember, the things we fear most often find us when we're alone. When the house grows quiet, when the knocking begins. If you made it this far, you already know the truth. Darkness always leaves a trace, and there are more stories waiting. Much darker, much closer to home. In fact, the next tale might be the most unsettling yet, because it's not about them, it's about you. So subscribe, turn on the light if you have to, and prepare yourself for the next story. Trust me, you won't sleep after this one.